No matter how robust we think our security posture is, it will never be perfect. At some point, some sort of threat will come along and exploit one of our weaknesses and cause a real problem. This might come in the form of malware, such as a virus. It might manifest as someone taking over your admin accounts or just defacing your website. Who knows? Since incidents can and will happen, it's important to be as prepared as you can. Preparation will mean that the organization continues to deliver key services, that its good reputation remains untarnished, and that the safety and well being of both staff and customers is maintained. To get prepared, we have to consider a couple of issues. For example, what is important to us? If we know what is important, we can start putting in plans to protect it. We can also start to prioritize our time and effort because our resources are finite. One of the first plans we need, therefore, is a business continuity document. As the name implies, this document is all about keeping the show on the road during an IT meltdown. The most important aspect of a BCP plan is identifying mission critical functions. These are quite literally your reason for being. What does your organization do that is critical to its survival? What are its overarching goals? For example, if I was a school, perhaps it would all be about the education of students. Perhaps this is the most critical function that must happen day in, day out for that school to survive or achieve its long term goals. To be honest, this is probably a good point for you to pause the video so you can consider your own mission critical functions. Go ahead and I'll see you back in a couple of minutes. Ready? Okay, here we go. I'm going to keep my example school related just because I've worked in them and I need a working example. But you'll find what I have to say useful no matter what industry you work in. So, just to make sure we're on the right track, let me show you what I came up with. My first mission critical function is student education. My second is student and employee welfare and safety. My third is keeping operating costs efficient. My fourth mission critical function is to maintain the school's reputation. And my fifth is to comply with legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations. At this point, it might be another good idea to pause the video and consider which of your MCFs are the most important. Or, in other words, in a crisis, what's the most critical? What comes first, second, and then third? Ready? Okay, I'll see you back in a minute. So, how do we do? I realize that this question is a bit artificial, but we are starting to formulate what we call our risk appetite. In other words, we are asking ourselves what we can tolerate if things go wrong, what is palatable and what is not. Knowing our threshold for risk is important when it comes to throwing resources at a problem. A low risk tolerance means devoting more time and more effort to make sure things are kept up and running or to recover services after a security incident. So let's continue with this idea a bit further. You can see here that I've started to create a big table in a Word document. The first column identifies my mission critical functions. The second column starts to identify the big activities that support these functions. And the third column, if you haven't already guessed, identifies all the sub activities. These are the day to day operations or the processing or data requirements needed to achieve my MCFs. I suppose a very good question is, how do you check that you haven't missed anything important out? Or to rephrase the question, what would be the best way to double check that every department or functional area within the organization is covered? Yeah, you've probably guessed. You'd probably disseminate the table to a variety of different stakeholders and most likely your heads of department. I'd now like to focus our attention on a really important metric called the MTD. The MTD means maximum tolerable downtime, and it represents how long you can afford to go without doing an activity before irreparable harm is done to the business and its mission critical goals. The MTD could be within an hour, 24 hours, a day, a week, a month, or even a whole year. For example, accessing a system that lets you register pupils must happen within the hour. Otherwise, you wouldn't know where students were during the school day, and that's a real safeguarding concern. So your MTD here would be 1 hour. Alternatively, if you were a school and I asked you what your MTD is for accessing schemes of work, these are the things that tell you what to teach and when. You might say, well, for A level students, it's 2 weeks, but for GCSE students, most of it's in my head, so it's 6 weeks. So you might write down 2 weeks as your MTD, but jot down any important exceptions. Knowing the MTD is easier if we can work out the impact of not being able to do each activity that supports mission critical functions. How important is each activity? What impact will it have on your mission goals if they cannot be done for any length of time? You can determine the impact by assigning a rating. For example, you might use low, medium, and high, where low is 1, medium 2, and high is 3. Alternatively, you can add further granularity by going with very low, low, medium, high, and very high. So, if we started to ask our various heads of department to start filling out the MTD and the impact column with these sorts of figures, can you guess what the problem would be? Pause the video and have a think. Happy? So, firstly, how do we know what these levels mean? My level 3 might actually look like your level 2 or even your level 1. Therefore, we need to define our criteria to achieve any measure of consistency. Secondly, most departments will exhibit some form of natural bias towards the work they do and its overall significance. This is why the involvement of the senior leadership team is critical, because only they can arbitrate disputes and determine the overall criticality. So we might define what low or a 1 means. For example, this will have a limited effect on operations and people. You might be able to carry out your primary functions, but with noticeable degradation. It may cause some damage to your reputation, your finances, or even minor harm to individuals. Alternatively, a high ranking threat might be defined as having a severe or catastrophic effect on operations and people. There will be a severe degradation or complete loss of mission capability, or in other words, the organization will not be able to perform one or more of its primary functions. A high risk may result in severe or catastrophic harm to reputation, to your finances, or to individuals, such as loss of life or life threatening injuries. Of course, a ranking of medium might fall somewhere between both of these definitions. Finally, we have an additional notes column in our table. This is so we can explain the rationale behind some of our decisions. This may include documenting any exceptions or changes in circumstances that might require us to reassess the impact. For example, if we started to move more processes to the cloud, then we need to come back and look at the impact of having no broadband. Our last column is dedicated to possible workarounds, manual or otherwise. If the worst happens, how can you keep the activity alive with no IT resources? What records will you need? What information? What processes will need putting in place? You have to think this through carefully because it will save your bacon later. Start with those activities that have the highest impact. From an IT perspective, knowing what SLT think is important and knowing their MTD is really useful. For example, I can reevaluate how my network is configured and add more security controls or better redundancy to systems and processes with a high value. For example, if students can't access their work, it might not be such a problem. But if the admin team can't, we have a real issue on our hands as identified by SLT. So let's put their data on a separate network and add more controls to protect that information. I can also adjust system configurations to ensure that they better support mission critical functions. For example, I could redeploy Wi Fi hotspots to support teachers on the move rather than the admin teams who are stationary because I know this is important to SLT. I can also reassess my recovery strategies to get the most important systems back online after a disaster, and I know what my deadline is in terms of time. It's the MTD. In this slide, I wanted you to get an idea of what happens next. Ideally, you would now hand over these documents to IT, who will try to identify the technologies that underpin these key activities. So, for each function, what hardware is required, what software, what services, what infrastructure, what networking is needed, what data and information is required, and where is this data stored or processed. IT also needs to determine an important metric called the work recovery time or WRT. This defines how long it should take to get a particular service back up and running after a problem. Obviously, the work recovery time must be less than your maximum tolerable downtime, lest you have a real serious problem on your hands. However, calculating the WRT is actually really hard because it heavily depends on the type of problem you're experiencing. This is just one of the reasons why many organizations develop an incident playbook. A playbook will outline the various actions that need to be taken, usually in the form of checklists, if an incident was to occur. The more scenarios your playbook covers, the better prepared you'll be. For example, how will you respond to a ransomware attack which infects a finance department, a computer worm which has infected a desktop, a particularly bad phishing campaign that requires the mail server to be purged, a rogue administrator account discovered on the network, or a case of website defacement and account lockouts you can't even remove the offending messages. The more incidents you consider, the more you will know what to do in a crisis and the more accurate the WRT will be. Okay, so first, the bad news. If you want to be able to deal with a security breach, you need to write a cybersecurity incident response plan, or a CSIRP. The rest of this presentation gives you a whistle stop tour of what this document consists of and what it looks like. The good news is that once you've written your response plan, you've won half the battle right there. And you don't need to write a doctorate here either. You just need to think about some of the key areas and topics I'm going to discuss. A cybersecurity incident response plan will include 5 sections. The first part is the introduction, overview, and some important information about the response team. So you kick off by writing the plan objectives. This is just a short, impactful statement. For example, this document will help the organization identify, analyze, contain, eradicate, and recover from security incidents. As such, it will define who will do what, when, and how, so that the operational, financial, and reputational impact of a security related issue is mitigated or manageable. You should then include something on the plan ownership. For example, you should identify an appropriate person within the organization who will make sure that the CSIRT provisions are communicated, understood, and enforceable. This person must have the support of the senior leadership team and the board of directors, otherwise, you'll never get the buy in which you need. You should also include a section that covers the scope of the plan, so it will say what institutional data is covered by it, or what information systems or what networks fall under its remit. Don't forget to include any person, device, or partner system that accesses your data too. It's also a very good idea to include a section on definitions. What exactly is a security incident and how is it different to a security event? What is a data breach? What is a threat actor or a vulnerability? What do we mean by personally identifiable information, a DDoS, ransomware, or a whaling attack? If terms are defined carefully, everyone sings from the same hymn sheet and effective dialogue can take place. People will understand what you're talking about and what kind of response is expected from them. An effective CSIRT will also take some time to outline roles and responsibilities. For example, who can lead the incident response team? Who can procure goods and services in a crisis? Who will liaise with HR when there's an insider threat or an internal breach of policy? Who has the expertise to explain how laws, regulations, and contractual agreements are affected? Again, who has the skill and diplomacy to communicate across the organization and to third parties what is happening in a manner that will not adversely affect the reputation of the organization? Remember, you don't need someone in the organization to fill all these roles. You can just as easily hire out specialists as and when needed. But knowing in advance who can solve what problem is extremely useful. Okay, so we've now hit the second section of our CSIRT plan, which is response and declaration. Things become a lot easier when there is criteria to classify a security incident. It is so much better to say we've seen some account misuse or we're experiencing a distributed denial of service attack, and for everyone to understand what this means and what they should be doing about it. Life is also simpler when you have criteria to rate the security incident. So your CSIRP should clearly state how the gravity of the incident will be measured. in order to elicit the appropriate response across the organization. For example, you might use something like this. Here, we've developed a table that uses three broad headings: functional impact, information impact, and recoverability effort. So, if we concentrate on the first column here, the security breach may have no effect on the organization's ability to provide all services to all users. Alternatively, the incident may mean loss of all critical services for all users. Again, looking at the second column, we might be able to say that no information was stolen or compromised. Alternatively, we might say we've had a privacy breach, which means we've lost employee or customer data. You can also have a proprietary breach, which means sensitive company information has been compromised or stolen, such as trade secrets, financial records, internal memos, or other important documentation. We might also be able to say that we've suffered a loss of integrity because sensitive or proprietary information has been changed or deleted. Sometimes, however, the situation is non recoverable because the data has already been posted and you just need to crack on with investigation and notification. Your CSERP should outline your declaration procedures. In other words, based on your initial assessment of the incident, how will an emergency be declared and communicated to the appropriate teams? Additionally, you want to be able to say what you're expecting to happen next, such as which strategies should be implemented. All this means that your plan needs important contact details embedding. So get all your critical contacts and jot them down here. You need full name, job role, and two phone numbers as a minimum. This is not just a list of organization's employees either. It might include your suppliers, your solicitors, your police cyber response team, utilities, or PR specialists. Many organizations also take the time to develop a cascade tree to facilitate quicker communication across the enterprise. So my line manager rings me, I ring those people that I line manage, and so on. I always encourage an organization to consider facilities and technologies too. It might sound rather dramatic, for example, but you should probably try to identify a war room. This is a pre assigned location containing everything the team will need to handle the incident, from stationery to USB thumb drives that can capture forensically sound images. A war room usually includes a redundant line of communication in case yours are compromised, and a separate internet connection too, so you can send messages, research, and procure goods and services. The war room is probably the most effective way of gathering together key personnel to facilitate quicker decisions whilst ensuring unity of effort. Make sure your CSERP includes a section on documentation. Think of all the documents you may want at your fingertips and state their location, bearing in mind that your IT systems might be down. Different people will need different things. For example, strategic team leaders will need a business impact assessment or business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, as well as organizational charts showing who is who and in what department. Technical teams, however, will need network architecture diagrams, asset lists, change management documentation, network baselines so that they can detect anomalous activity, and incident playbooks. Your comms will need draft communication materials with content placeholders, internal memos, or question and answer documents to address questions from customers, investors, and the media about the security incident. A good plan will also spend a few minutes considering any important exceptions to your incident response plan. For example, when dealing with an insider threat, the handling and reporting procedures may differ slightly. If highly sensitive information is compromised, there might be restrictions on what evidence can be captured or recorded in your incident tracking systems or your logs, so document all deviations here. So we finally arrived to part three, which covers how you go about investigating, containing, and mitigating security incidents. When it comes to recording intelligence, your C-sharp should spell out what will be recorded about each incident. This will be the who, what, when, where, how, and why. Some organization will use formal, well-known industry standards to document intel, such as the Diamond model, which we have resources on our website. Others will just generate a series of templates with instructions on who should receive a copy and what distribution method should be used. Just be mindful that this is sensitive information and your usual channels of dissemination might be compromised. You can even use software to track investigations by storing artifacts or evidence of the incident, logging help desk requests, and to help facilitate the sharing of important information. You can see here that I've listed some excellent open source tools that have been developed for these purposes. Whatever option you go with, never underestimate the value of documenting events and actions. It may sound like crazy advice to start making notes during a crisis, but you may need this for legal purposes, for a post mortem analysis when you try and work out what happened, or just to organize your thought processes and plan the next logical steps to take. Your CSERT will spell out your requirements for evidence collection. This may be especially important in the event of a data breach, or when dealing with civil lawsuits, or with insurance companies, or when you're trying to discover the root cause of an incident. Be mindful that some evidence, such as anything stored in the computer's memory or its RAM, will perish quickly, and any evidence captured must be preserved in a forensically sound manner to have any credibility in a court of law. It is also worth stressing that this is high value data, so you will need to explain how it should be secured and shared in your CSERT plan. If all of this sounds rather horrible, just call Action Fraud. They will put you in touch with us and we can help get that evidence for you for free. So now we move from intelligence gathering and onto containment and mitigation. Containment is basically just that. You stop the problem from spreading, perhaps from infecting other parts of your network or devices. Whilst mitigation is about reducing the negative effects of the security incident. So, some organizations take this opportunity to outline some initial containment strategies for a variety of different incidents. For example, if there is some form of malicious email infection, then you might decide to take the mail server offline. Again, if a rogue account is discovered, it might be disabled. Mitigation strategies might include removing a virus, revoking an encryption key that's been compromised, or firing up a backup server and breaking out some spare laptops. Whatever you decide to do, if possible, make sure that the attacker does not realize what you are doing. Otherwise, they'll just change tactics or deliver a harmful payload there and then. So now we move on to one of the most important documents any organization can have, a playbook. A playbook will outline multiple incidents and the workflows necessary to resolve them. A playbook can be developed through tabletop exercising. In other words, key personnel sit around a table and discuss different types of incidents and what action should be taken. The more scenarios that can be thought of, the better. For each type of incident, a good playbook might spell out telltale symptoms, containment, mitigation, eradication, and recovery strategies. These strategies are often broken down into step by step checklists. Trust me, every checklist is worth its weight in gold when an organization is in trouble. It is tempting to leave the development of this playbook and the tabletop exercising to IT teams. However, that would be a huge mistake. For example, only members of the senior leadership team have a line of escalation and a platform to update and communicate to senior board members. Only SLT can determine the level of acceptable risk to mission critical goals and, for example, determine whether a system can be shut down. For instance, if your email system is infected with a dangerous phishing email, IT could probably resolve the problem by purging the mail server. That's a 2-minute solution, but would you be happy to lose all your existing emails? Again, only public relations can craft consumer facing materials to protect the reputation of the organization. Only public relations can identify the best notification and crisis management tactics for each type of scenario, which is why they deserve a seat at the table too. And finally, only legal can determine whether the organization should notify affected individuals, regulatory bodies, and other relevant third parties. They will also be able to advise on what evidence must be kept to demonstrate due care and diligence for each type of incident. So we've now hit step 4 of the CSERP. Yay, step 4, recovery and notification. When dealing with an incident, you need a business continuity plan. The CSERP will emphasize the importance of the business continuity plan at this point. Remember, the BCP describes how the different departments will keep the show on the road despite the loss of services or facilities. Just as importantly, our CSERP will emphasize our disaster recovery strategies. Our incident playbook plays a critical part here because it will outline the strategies and workflows to enable the recovery of services as dictated by their criticality, which is another reason why the senior leadership team has to be involved, because they will tell you what IT systems are the most important to get back up and running. Recovery usually involves system hardening, such as the removal of redundant services, the removal of default accounts with, admin as the username and password, or installing patches and security updates. Recovery can also include the deployment of additional security controls, such as two-factor authentication, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and so on. Or it might involve the installation of a clean backup. Of course, getting your IT systems up and running is all well and good, but you need some sort of assurance that they are no longer prone to attack. Most enterprises will therefore use this space of their CSERP to outline how your response teams will test, validate, and certify systems. It is quite tempting to skip this part of your plan, but rolling back prematurely can often precipitate a second disaster. Finally, you should also state how the incident will be officially declared over. This is known as your recovery declaration. And finally, our last slide, the post incident report. Again, don't be tempted to skip this section. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and looking back at what you did and what you should have done will help you weather any future incidents. So make sure your CSERP includes a template to help document the entire incident from start to finish. Typical sections include incident identification information, such as the date and time of discovery and notification, the incident duration, and the contact details of the report author. Also include an executive summary that gives a high-level overview of events, decisions taken, implications, and the consequences for the organization. Include an incident root cause, which illustrates the who, what, when, where, why, and the impact of the breach. Some reports will also include an incident timeline to give an overview of events, including key discoveries and communications. It is also a good idea to include a summary of the actions taken to contain, mitigate, remediate, and recover. Most organizations will also include information on the evidence relied upon and acquisitions made. And last but not least, the evaluation, which covers all the important lessons learned. Always draw together key players to evaluate any processes followed and tools used. What went well? What might have gone better? This is your blueprint for dealing with future incidents and is probably one of the most important steps to take and document. Your CSERP is not something that should be carefully placed in a glass cabinet with instructions to break glass in case of an emergency. It needs to be embedded into the workforce so that everyone understands their role and responsibilities, as well as how they can support the efforts of the incident response team. In particular, the playbook is essential to discovery. As such, it must be the product of careful consideration by multiple team players. Tabletop exercising detailing different types of threats are critical. To learn more about how to organize such sessions, check out some of the resources on our website.